My call sign's Jack, Major in the Royal Australian Air Force, flying the F-35A Lightning II with No. 3 Squadron out of RAAF Base Williamtown. By the time I deployed to Nellis for Red Flag 25-1, I had a little over 1,200 hours in the jet, plenty of time doing maritime patrols over the South China Sea, air-to-air workups against our own Hornets and Super Hornets, and a couple of multinational exercises like Pitch Black and Talisman Sabre. I'd been through the full RAAF training pipeline, classic Hornet conversion first, then the transition to the F-35. We take pride in doing things right, methodical, safety-focused, professional, NATO standards all the way. I arrived in Nevada in January 2025 feeling quietly confident. Australia had been operating the F-35A for years. Our jets were on the same software block as the USAF, same weapons integration, same stealth coatings. We'd stood up 2 full squadrons, built a solid maintainer base, and developed tactics that we thought were world-class. I honestly believe the only real difference between us and the Americans was scale. They had hundreds of airframes and thousands of pilots. We had dozens. But per capita quality, I figured we were right there with them. The F-35, in my mind back then, had fundamentally changed air combat. It wasn't a fighter in the old sense, it was a flying information node. Sensor fusion gave you a perfect battlespace picture. APG-81 radar, EOTS, DAS 360-degree infrared, MADL data link pulling in tracks from every other 5th-gen platform. You saw the enemy long before they saw you. You shot first, from beyond visual range, and you went home. The pilot's job was to manage that information, follow procedures, and execute cleanly. Aggressiveness felt like a relic of 4th-generation thinking, something for F-16 and Hornet guys who still had to get in close and mix it up. In the Lightning, patience and precision were king. We don't talk a lot about warrior culture in the RAAF the way the Americans sometimes do. We emphasise discipline, risk mitigation and de-escalation, zero tolerance for unnecessary danger in training, safety briefs for every mission, detailed threat analysis, strict rules of engagement. I liked that. It felt mature, responsible. I thought it made us reliable partners, steady hands when things got tense. Red Flag was supposed to be the ultimate validation, largest air exercise in the world, massive range, aggressor squadrons replicating peer-level threats, full joint integration with the US Air Force, Navy, Marines and even the RAAF. Our contingent was huge by Australian standards, F-35As from 3 and 77 squadrons, EA-18G Growlers, FA-18F Super Hornets, an E-7A Wedgetail, tankers and a full command element. I saw it as a chance to test our tactics on a bigger stage, standardise procedures and come home with some good stories. I stepped off the C-17 at Nellis expecting to impress. Our jets looked pristine, our crews were sharp, and I was ready to show that a small air force could punch above its weight. I had no idea how wrong I was.
The first morning briefing hit me like cold water. The room was packed, dozens of air crews from multiple nations, huge screens showing the Nevada test and training range, threat overlays already up. The lead briefer, a USAF colonel, didn't waste time on motivational speeches or long reviews of learning objectives. He jumped straight into the mission. And the language was different from anything I'd heard back home. Not if the data link is degraded, not in the event of heavy jamming, just when the link drops, and it will drop early because Red is bringing heavy EW, here's your fallback. When the wedgetail gets targeted in the first wave, when half your package is committed defending tankers before you even reach the target area. When, not if. Every contingency was framed as something that had already happened. The entire brief built the plan around failure, not around success. Then came the questions from the floor. American pilots didn't ask how to avoid problems, they asked how to fight through them. If your MAD DIL is completely jammed and you've got no off-board tracks, how do you prosecute? If your wingman takes a hit in the first 30 seconds of the merge, do you press or disengage? If the picture breaks down and you're relying on voice only, what's your commit criteria? No long explanations, no softening the edges, just rapid-fire probing for gaps in thinking. I tried to contribute once. I suggested holding at high altitude to let sensor fusion rebuild the picture before committing. A USAF F-22 pilot nearby gave a short laugh. Holding gets you dead, mate. You've got to get inside their decision cycle. That phrase stuck with me. Inside their decision cycle. ODDA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. We'd studied John Boyd in training, but it felt academic. Here, it was visceral. That night in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the brief. Back in Australia, our planning is meticulous, risk-averse by design. We have a small force. We can't afford losses in training. Every scenario includes multiple layers of mitigation. We assume systems will work most of the time and build contingencies for when they don't. The Americans seem to assume systems would fail early and often, and then train to win anyway. It wasn't arrogance, it was a different philosophy. Speed over perfection, decisiveness over caution, acceptance of loss to achieve the objective. I started to feel the first cracks in my confidence.
The first few combat sorties were humbling. Mission 1, Large Defensive Counter-Air Package. My four-ship of F-35As was tasked as sensor lead, stealthy, high, pushing the picture forward. Aggressors in F-16s flying PALAF-style tactics, heavy jamming, numerical superiority, early long-range shots. I felt untouchable. DAS picking up emitters, fusion correlating tracks beautifully. Picture's clean, I told my wingman. Then the aggressors committed hard and early. They sacrificed their own stealth advantage to force us into a reaction. USAF F-22s and F-15s countered aggressively, dragging red air into kill boxes. I hesitated. I waited for perfect correlation on a high-threat group before committing. Procedure, positive ID, no risk of blue on blue. Those few seconds cost me. Virtual missile impact. Jack, one's dead. Debrief was clinical, no mockery, just facts. The shot window had been there 18 seconds earlier. The jet had given me everything I needed. I just didn't pull the trigger. Next sorties followed the same pattern. I kept dying. Not because I couldn't fly the jet or manage systems, but because I was slow to decide. I lacked the tactical ruthlessness the Americans displayed routinely. They attacked imperfect pictures. They accepted risk to shape the fight for the package. They maneuvered aggressively, even when it meant giving up their own advantage temporarily. One evening, after another death, a USAF F-35 pilot sat next to me during debrief rewind. "We've all been shot down here 100 times," he said. "That's why we come. Better a sim missile than the real thing." I realized something painful. My confidence had been in the technology. Their confidence was in surviving when the technology failed. They flew like men who had already died in their minds repeatedly and learned from it.
One of the biggest differences I noticed at Red Flag wasn't the hardware or even the tactics. It was how openly and matter-of-factly the Americans talked about war. Not the sanitized, abstract version you get in staff college briefs, but the raw, ugly reality of it. Back home in the RAAF, we rarely use the phrase combat readiness in casual conversation. We talk about operational capability, currency, proficiency, interoperability. We focus on safety, risk management, and making sure everyone goes home at the end of the day. Death is something we brief around, ejection procedures, search and rescue coordination, but we don't dwell on it. It's treated as a distant, theoretical possibility that good planning and solid procedures will prevent. At Nellis, death was treated as a variable. I remember one pre-mission brief where USAF squadron commander laid out the package objectives and then, almost as an afterthought, added, "Expect attrition. Red is bringing numbers and heavy jamming. Some of us won't make it to the target and back. That's fine, as long as the mission succeeds and we take more of them with us than they take of us." No drama, no chest thumping, just cold acceptance.
Later, in the bar one night, the famous Nellis O Club tradition, I overheard two F-16 pilots from the aggressor squadron talking shop. One was recounting a sortie where he'd been killed early. The other laughed and said, "Yeah, but you took 2 blue with you. Did trade." They clinked bottles like they were discussing a golf score. That casual attitude toward loss unnerved me at first. It felt almost callous. But the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't callousness, it was realism. They train for the worst day imaginable, outnumbered, out of position, systems degraded, half the package gone before the fight even starts, and they still expect to win. They don't romanticize war. There's no talk of glory or honor in the briefs, just survival and mission accomplishment. Get the bombs on target. Deny Red the airspace. Protect the tankers so the follow-on waves can press. Everything else is secondary. One evening, after a particularly brutal sortie, my foreship had been wiped out early trying to sanitize a threat ring for the strikers. I sat in on a small debrief with a mixed group of USAF and USMC F-35 pilots. Someone asked the inevitable question, what if this had been real? A Marine major shrugged. Some of us would have punched out over hostile territory. Some wouldn't have made it to the chute. That's why we train like this, so the rest of the package still gets through. Another pilot added, if I go down, I want to know I bought time for the guys behind me. That's the deal we all signed up for. I didn't say anything. I just listened. In Australia, we don't have those conversations. We're a small force. Losing even one jet or one pilot in training is a national headline. We design our exercises to minimize risk. The Americans designed theirs to maximize learning, even if that means accepting virtual losses every single day. That acceptance of mortality wasn't defeatist. It was the opposite. It freed them to take calculated risks, to press attacks when the picture wasn't perfect, to commit early and shape the fight. They weren't flying to survive the sortie. They were flying to win the war. And that mindset, more than any sensor or weapon system, was what kept giving them the edge.
Red flag isn't just about dogfighting or even strike packages. It's large force employment on a scale I'd never experienced. 30, 40, sometimes 50-plus aircraft in a single wave. Fighters, bombers, EW platforms, tankers, ISR, command and control, all orchestrated in real time across hundreds of miles of airspace. The F-35 shines in that environment because it was designed as a node in a much larger network. But watching the Americans operate it, I realized how narrowly I'd been thinking about the jet. In RAAF training, we often fly small packages, 4 ships, maybe 8 ships with Hornets or Growlers attached. We practice sensor fusion within our own formation, sharing tracks via MADL, building a bubble of perfect awareness around us. The jet becomes the center of the universe. You trust the systems to give you dominance, and you operate semi-independently. The Americans never think that way. The F-35 is just one piece, important but expendable in a much bigger system that spans air, sea, space, and cyber domains. Growlers jam from standoff ranges. F-22s sweep ahead, forcing threats to radiate and reveal themselves. E-3s or E-7s provide big-picture command. Rivet joint or RC-135s hoover up signals intel. Tankers orbit and racetracks, ready to refuel multiple waves. Satellites cue long-range shots. Cyber effects degrade enemy radars before the first jet even crosses the border. When the network is healthy, it's overwhelming. The fused picture across the entire battlespace is godlike. But the real eye-opener came when the network broke, as it always did, because red air brought heavy, realistic electronic attack. In one mission, jamming hit us hard right after push. MADL dropped, Link 16 degraded, voice comms became the primary. Half my displays went red or amber. Back home, that would trigger an immediate abort or retreat to rebuild the picture.
Instead, the package lead, a USAF F-22 pilot, calmly shifted to voice coordination and pressed the attack anyway. Fighters maneuvered based on experience and pre-briefed contingencies. Growlers repositioned aggressively to break the jam. Strikers continued inbound. We still took losses, but the mission succeeded. Afterward, in debrief, I asked how they kept cohesion without the data links. The answer was simple. We don't rely on the network to think for us. It's a force multiplier, not a crutch. I realized my weakness. I'd become too dependent on the jet's automation. When the fusion was perfect, I was lethal. When it wasn't, I froze. The Americans had a deeper trust, not in the machine, but in the broader system and in their own instincts. They'd trained for years to operate degraded, to fall back on raw pilot skills, formation discipline, and battle-tested intuition. Our E-7A wedgetail performed brilliantly, by the way. The USAF loved having it. They said it filled gaps in their own coverage. But even with that asset, the difference in approach was clear. We saw the wedgetail as an extension of our control. They saw it as just another tool that could be lost early and planned around that. By the end of the exercise, I stopped thinking of the F-35 as a standalone superfighter. It's a quarterback, but only effective when the entire team is on the same page and when the quarterback is ready to scramble if the play breaks down.
By the end of the first week, the pattern was clear. I was getting killed far more often than I was getting kills. Not because the jet was letting me down, not because the aggressors were cheating the sim rules, but because my decision cycle was too slow. I'd built my entire professional identity around being a precise, disciplined, systems-focused pilot, and red flag was showing me day after day that precision without speed was a liability in a high-intensity fight. The nights started getting long. I'd get back to my room at the Nellis Inn around 2200, shower, grab a beer from the mini-fridge, and sit at the little desk with my notebook open. At first, I was just logging the day's missions, times, loadouts, outcomes, lessons identified, standard habit. But after a few days, the entries turned personal. Who am I up here? A highly trained systems manager or a fighter pilot? If tomorrow this wasn't red flag, if it was real over the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea, would I make it home? Am I actually ready to fight a war or just really good at passing training events? I'd never asked myself those questions before. In the RAAF, we don't encourage that kind of introspection. You meet the gates, you stay current, you pass the check rides, you're good to go. Doubt is seen as unprofessional, but at Nellis, doubt was the currency. Every debrief was an autopsy of your mistakes, and every American pilot seemed comfortable admitting how often they'd screwed up. So I started changing. First thing, I stopped waiting for perfect information. In one sortie mid-exercise, jamming hit early again. Fusion picture fragmented. I had a probable high-threat group at 35 miles, but only 70% correlation. Back home, I would have held off, waited for another scan cycle or off-board cue. Instead, I remembered the debriefs. Imperfect shot now beats perfect shot never. I committed early, ripple-fired 2 AMRAAMs, and maneuvered to support the package. Both missiles went pitbull, one scored a kill. I still died later in the merge, but I took an aggressor with me, and more importantly, I shaped the fight for the strikers behind me. It felt reckless at first. My heart rate spiked harder than it had in years, but it worked. I started asking more questions after flights, not the polite professional ones I'd been using early on, real ones. I cornered a USAF captain from the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron one evening and asked point blank, "How do you train yourselves to pull the trigger when the picture isn't clean?" He didn't hesitate. We kill each other in the sim every day. Hundreds of reps getting shot down for being too cautious. You rewire your brain until hesitation feels more dangerous than risk. So I took that back to our own contingent, started pushing our 4 ships to run more degraded scenarios in the downtime sims. Told my wingmen, no more waiting for God's eye, decide and act.
I also started studying the Americans' aggressiveness more closely. It wasn't cowboy stuff. It was calculated, always in service of the larger package objective. They'd sacrifice a perfect firing solution if it meant dragging Red Air into a worse position for the follow-on wave. That kind of selflessness only comes when you've internalized that the mission matters more than your individual survival. By the second week, I was sleeping a little better. Not because I was winning more, I still got shot down plenty, but because I was deciding faster, acting on incomplete data, trusting instinct again instead of just the helmet display. I wasn't there yet, nowhere near, but for the first time since arriving, I felt like I was learning instead of just surviving the lessons.
The last mission of Red Flag 25-1 was the capstone, full-up vulnerability period, maximum aircraft, most complex threat laydown of the exercise. Everything we'd practiced, large package ingress, heavy contested EW environment, integrated air and missile defense threats, aggressors throwing everything they had. My four-ship drew sensor lead again, pushing ahead of the main strike package. The brief was grim. Expect early attrition, expect degraded comms, expect to lose at least 1/4 of blue air before weapons release. Push time came. We launched into clear Nevada sky, climbed to altitude, went cold and quiet on emissions. For the first 10 minutes, the picture looked good. Fusion clean, wedge-tail feeding big-picture tracks. Then Red turned on the fire hose. Jamming blanketed the battle space. Link dropped. Voice comms became primary. Aggressors swept in hard from multiple axes. I didn't hesitate this time. Probable bandit group bearing 040, high, fast, correlation 65%. I called commit, ripple fired, turned hot to support the package flank. One missile guided, scored, but the counterattack was immediate. Virtual SAMs and fighters collapsing on us. I fought hard, maneuvered aggressively, used terrain masking in the range valleys, dumped chaff and flares like it was real. Took a second kill in the merge, gun solution on an F-16 that got too eager. But numbers told. My wingman went down, then number 3. I lasted another 2 minutes before a long-range shot from a flanker equivalent ended my jet. Knock it off. Blue 4-ship is dead. Back on the ground, I expected the usual frustration. Instead, I felt calm. I hadn't won the fight, but I'd pressed it. I'd made Red pay attention to us, bought time and space for the strikers. The package got through, bombs on target, mission success. Debrief was short and positive. The USAF package commander, a lieutenant colonel flying F-22s, nodded in my direction. AZ lead element shaped the threat early, good commits. After shutdown, I walked across the line to the USAF shelters, found the F-35 pilot who'd been leading the opposing blue element in several of our toughest sorties. We'd killed each other multiple times over the 2 weeks. He was already out of his jet, flight suit unzipped, helmet under his arm. I stuck out my hand. He shook it firmly, no smile, no gloating. "You'll be fine. Just don't hesitate." That was it. No speeches, no great job, just quiet professional respect. I nodded. Copy that. Walking back to our side of the ramp, I realized that was the highest compliment I'd received the entire exercise. We packed up and left Nellis a few days after the final mission. The long flight home on the C-17 gave me too much time to think. I stared out the window at the Pacific stretching below and kept coming back to the same realization. Red Flag hadn't just taught me new tactics, it had exposed a deeper truth I'd been avoiding for years. The F-35 is extraordinary, there's no question about that. It gives you capabilities no previous generation of fighter could dream of. Stealth that actually works against peer threats, sensor fusion that turns chaos into clarity, networking that multiplies the entire force. Australia made the right call buying it. We needed 5th generation to stay relevant in our region. But the jet doesn't make you a warrior.
I used to think that mastering the systems, knowing every mode of the radar, every nuance of the helmet display, every checklist item was enough. That if you flew the F-35 perfectly, followed procedures exactly, and leveraged the technology fully, you were ready for anything. Red flag proved that's only half the equation. The Americans I flew with weren't necessarily better stick and rudder pilots. They didn't have magic settings on their jets we didn't. What they had was a mindset forged in relentless, unforgiving training, an acceptance that war is uncertain, degrading and brutal, that perfection is impossible, that hesitation kills faster than any enemy missile, that sometimes you have to commit with an imperfect picture, accept losses, and press anyway because the mission and the lives depending on it demand it. I came home humbled, not defeated, not bitter, just awake. I no longer believe I was truly ready before Nevada. I was ready for peacetime operations, ready for training events and exercises where safety margins are wide and contingencies are layered, ready to operate a high-tech platform with precision and professionalism. But ready for real war? No, not then. If a shooting conflict broke out tomorrow, say a crisis in the Indo-Pacific against a peer adversary with numbers, advanced SAMs and their own fifth-gen fighters, I know I'd fight harder and smarter than I would have a year ago. I'd decide faster. I'd take calculated risks. I'd trust the broader system and my own instincts when the screens went red. But I also know I still have a long way to go. There are gaps in my thinking that 2 weeks at red flag only started to close. Aggressiveness without recklessness, decisiveness without arrogance, accepting attrition without becoming numb to it. Those aren't switches you flip, they're habits you build over years of hard, realistic training. Back at Williamtown now, I've already started pushing changes in our squadron. More degraded scenarios in the sim, more worst day planning in briefs, more open conversation about what real combat readiness actually requires. Some of the younger guys look at me funny when I talk about it, the way I probably would have a couple of years ago. That's okay. They'll figure it out eventually, hopefully in training, not the hard way. I'm grateful to the USAF for hosting us, to the aggressors for killing us so thoroughly, and to every American pilot who shared a debrief, a beer, or just a nod across the ramp. They didn't coddle us, they didn't need to. They just showed us what high-intensity readiness looks like day after day. No illusions left, just respect and a clearer view of the work still ahead. Jack, Major, RAFS, Number 3 Squadron, Williamtown, December 2025.